Leading anything is hard, especially when the mission is deeply challenging and the resources are scarce. Welcome to the Elevate podcast, where we have meaningful conversations with leaders about growing healthy organizations. Your host is Neil Hart, and this podcast is brought to you by the Mergon Foundation, a resource partner to ministries who expand God's kingdom and bring hope and restoration to communities across Africa and the Middle East.
Welcome to our next episode of Elevate. Have you ever wondered about the different dimensions of organizational health and whether you as a leader are covering everything that you need to be covering? Today I'm with Werner Momberg. He's one of our colleagues at Mergon, and he and I and the rest of our good team have been doing a lot of work over these last 2 to 3 years on different aspects of organizational health and the implications that they have on mission. And so today we're talking about the jet fuel for organizational health. If you haven't met Werner yet, he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. He comes from an auditing background, he's led a missions training organization, and he and his family have lived overseas as missionaries in China for a number of years. Werner is what I call a polisher. He has the unique ability to take rough ideas, rudely hewn out of stone, and turning them into polished works of art. He loves the nuance and the detail in our work, and he brings a lot of expertise into this conversation. Werner, so good to be with you today.
Neil, thank you for inviting me to be with you. It's always a privilege and a lot of fun just to speak through these things.
Werner, let's maybe start off. Tell us a little bit about what we've learnt on this journey so far and what has been valuable for you.
For me personally, I think the greatest value was just to discover how leaders would find themselves driven by a passion and a calling to bring change, to suddenly leading a large organization which functions pretty much like a machine or like a vehicle to achieve a certain goal. And suddenly they have to deal with certain controls to make this vehicle move forward and go faster or slow down, and at the same time look at different instruments indicating whether this is actually on a healthy trajectory or struggling to achieve this certain outcome.
It certainly has been, and we've engaged with a number of different ministry leaders, taking the guys through our organizational self-perception scan, talking about organizational health. How much perspective do you think there is, if you think about the leaders that we've engaged with, around the broad topic of organizational health?
I think with the older generation leaders, if I can put it in that way, with a lot of respect, they're driven by passion and vision and calling, and very sacrificial, giving of themselves in serving people around them and serving communities. But I think at the same time, just in the broader community, everyone is realizing that it needs something slightly more. There needs to be more focus and more attention given to the organization as an identity and as a functioning unit in itself for long-term and sustainable success and impact over the long term. And I think what excites me the most is to just journey with some of the younger generation leaders that come in with slightly a different perspective, with an understanding and a new skill set of actually wanting to manage well and to empower and to create along the lines of team and of good governance and all the different dimensions.
Werner, we are borrowing from a metaphor from Starkey Yonker and Meehan's great book, The Engine of Impact, where it speaks about the engine and the jet fuel of the organization. As we dive into it, unpack that a little bit for us, the difference in those two things.
They use the metaphor of a jet engine that you would find on a plane, and if you just think of a jet engine, you know, you've got air flowing into the engine, which they refer to as the mission. So it's the oxygen, the life of this engine, and then that gets compressed right at the front of the engine. You've got a compressor, and that mission gets compressed into a strategy. which is your way of thinking of how you will achieve your mission. And then from there, they go through the different components of the jet engine. You have your jets that inserts the fuel in the engine. So they refer to that, the jets bringing the fuel of your funding, your financial inflow, your talent, which is your human resources or your team. And then obviously your board, which plays an important role in bringing the fuel to have you move forward. And then they have your thrust indicators. It's those measurements that you need to keep an eye on, which evaluates your impact. They would refer to that as your impact evaluation, just monitoring what is happening with this engine. And then they've got the turbines, which is also quite interesting, which they refer to in the non-profit space, looking at the courage of the leader and of your team, and the insights that you have within the situation. And that obviously then gives you the thrust or your actual impact that you could find in communities and through the organization. So really, really good read, going into detail in each of those areas.
So, I mean, when we talk about fuel, we're talking about a number of factors according to Engine of Impact. But one of the things, and you've brought this through in our team thinking, Werner, is you've spoken about perception. And so one of the pieces of the important pieces of fuel is the individuals, the people, recruiting the talent, the culture, that piece of it. And yeah, I'd love you to maybe talk a little bit about when we look at organizational health through the lens of perception of the people in the organization. Why is that important? I don't want to put you on the spot, but to me that feels like something that's really important for leaders to understand.
Often in the leadership journey with nonprofits, we so focused on securing the fuel in terms of finances. So you would find leaders going out and enthusing people with a mission of the organization and getting people on board and getting necessary finances to work within the organization and for the organization to move forward. But I suppose in many ways it would be, putting in that kind of specific fuel into an organization or into a vehicle that's not healthy. It's gonna take a lot of money or a lot of fuel put into a vehicle that's not healthy just to achieve a certain distance. Whereas if you could take less fuel and put it in a healthy vehicle, it would take you so much further and get you there. And an important aspect in that fuel conversation is your team. Yeah. And the way that they operate and function. That's a much more critical resource even than finance in itself. And perception plays such an important role. And it plays into aspects like culture and the values of the organization and the quality of the leadership team in itself. There's perception in the organization that a certain area is not healthy. So even a thing like we don't have enough financial resources to do the work, and that's going to influence the creativity and innovation of a team. Yeah. They would maybe move into a scarcity mentality and be hesitant to try new things and new ideas. Similarly, if they exclude it from thinking with regards to or giving input on strategy or with regards to even going on a journey in terms of the vision of the organization, you will find them very soon, if that's the perception, you will find them very soon fall into a trap of just doing an outcome or starting to lose interest and maybe look at other possibilities and options. But yeah, you've done a number of facilitation sessions with the leadership teams who've completed the scan. What was your thoughts or what was your experience in terms of this whole perception discussion?
I think we glorify God the most when we, as leaders and leadership teams, point the energy of our people outwards towards what God has called us to do, so that the maximum impact hits where it's meant to be, which is with beneficiaries, which is with people on the ground outside of the organization. But conversely, if the organization isn't fully healthy, or if a leader just doesn't have a good view of the different elements that make an organization healthy, then that energy is actually drawn into the organization.
I was just thinking, we use the term a leader of an organization, but you're actually leading people. And I think we would all agree, all of our ministry partners, everyone would agree that, I think the most important responsibility of a leader is to lead people and for them to achieve, and to do well and to release energy towards the mission, as you rightly pointed. And for that, it's not giving tasks, but it's actually managing perception and releasing a positive contribution towards a calling.
Werner, let's move on to the different aspects of organizational health. So in this process, we unpacked many different dimensions of organizational health. And I mean, we could probably create an exhaustive list of those things, but in the end, we settled on 11 different dimensions. And with those dimensions, starting from leadership and moving into mission and recruiting and strategy, and then moving through into other areas like finance and governance and evaluation, you started to look at the interconnectedness between some of those dimensions and how they related and interplayed with each other. Talk to us a little bit about that.
The interconnectedness was not an attended research aspect of the scan. As we were doing the scan and having feedback sessions with the different organization leaders, I think we just noticed, when you look at how they perceive their organizations are doing and which of these dimensions would need some attention, you could quickly draw some connections between the different dimensions which they would need to give some attention. So for instance, we had a discussion regarding mission clarity and focus, for instance, where an organization or the team actually felt that they needed some work in that space. And then when you look at the second dimension that needed some attention, it would be something like the identity, or what we would call brand and communication, the identity and how they communicate their identity outwards. And then you go a bit further on their results sheet, and then you would see, but they are also struggling in funding. And then just creates this aha moment of how these things are actually connected. Yeah. If we are more clear about our mission and we have more focus in terms of our mission, we also know who we are, and it helps us to communicate to people outside who we are and what we are about. And obviously that plays into funding, our ability to raise funds and resources to join our organization. So it was quite an interesting journey, just with each and every scan result that we do feedback on. Part of this journey that we have with ministry leaders is not to say that you need to be proficient in all 11 dimensions, but rather just develop a skill to monitor each of those 11 dimensions and know when you need some assistance or help in a certain space. We had an interesting experience just recently doing the scan with some of our ministry partners in the Middle East, and with two of those organizations, they both shared their struggle to draw talent or to draw members into the organization. And as we unpacked that a little, and they couldn't understand, what their needs or why this was a challenge for them. And as we unpacked the scan results, it started playing into work needed with regards to culture and values. So they were not sure what the organizational culture is. They're not sure with regards to their values. And unpacking it slightly further, then went into identity again of the organization and into mission. And the leader, after discussing this and just looking through it, he said to me, Werner, so the issue is not really starting with it we're struggling to get team members, we actually need to start with gaining clarity on these other dimensions, which will help us to attract.
I want to move us on to another really important thing that came out, which is the issue of organizational life stages. And this was again something I think we stumbled on as we began working through organizational health. And we see ministries in different places in their life stage. We see these sort of younger 2 to 3 to 4 year old organizations where the leader is burning red hot with the mission, and people are being recruited in like crazy because it's being well articulated and there's passion. And then we get organizations maybe 10, 15 years old that have started to think more deeply about the outcomes and the impact, and working on strategy. And we also see organizations that are, we're working with some organizations that are 50, 60 years old, have got great legacies, strong boards, and at times, sometimes that the governance can be so high that it can start to diminish the passion of the mission, because now we're managing something that's so big and over so many geographies that we've got to be more careful, and that can sometimes even strangle creativity and innovation. There's a lot that we could say around that, different leadership styles required for some of those different environments. You got any thoughts about that you want to share?
If you just look at the normal progression of any ministry, from getting a vision to moving on to the different aspects, and you've really helped us to look at the different dimensions in a chronological way. And I know you can't use that as a template for each and every organization, but it was helpful just to think through. And then obviously, as we reflect on the different areas of need after an organization has completed the organizational health scan, you suddenly see in which life stage they are finding themselves, and a lot of those weaknesses are actually a reflection of that life stage. And then the leadership style required for the different life stages, I think it's so important for a leader to recognize, but then also for the boards of an organization to recognize. And I think as mature leaders, we need to be aware of our own skill sets, our own abilities, our own strengths, but then also be able to reflect on the stage where this organization finds itself, and see how we can contribute, but maybe then allow a younger generation of leaders to step into that space and maybe lead where it's needed.
One of the other things that I picked up, it came across on one ministry that we were working with, who was probably in about their 10th or 11th year, and still really founder-led, strong vision, and wanting to expand geographically at a rapid pace. And after having looked at the organization, they realized that the items that needed to be in place for scaling weren't quite there. The systems weren't quite there. Their financial best practice wasn't exactly where it should be. Governance exactly not in the right place. And so often, if a leader wants to scale an organization because they've carried that vision, there needs to be enough organizational health in the factors that affect scaling before scaling can actually happen. Otherwise, what happens, we accelerate an organization off the edge of a cliff. So there's so many different aspects to this life stage conversation.
A big concern is with leadership that is a strong visionary leadership that's not so well tuned into the organizational health space, but rather, just progressing. Is that you might be able to get fuel to grow that capacity. You might be able to get funding and people to join you to expand and to step into. But if you put fuel into a broken engine, it's not going to go very far before things start to cost you in many ways, cost you money and repairs and attention, and it's not going to be a healthy moving forward. So I think for leadership to find that good balance between we are at a healthy enough space to engage into capacity building where we can actually extend and move into. So that timing is just so important for leadership to think about.
Yeah. And so knowing the season that you're in, not only as an organization but as a leader, becomes probably one of the secrets to building capacity. If we're at an early stage and we're shooting the lights out because we're passionate about the mission, capacity building might look like building into the leader's skill early on, building into the ability to train up and raise up people around them. If it's an older organization, chances are that mission and vision needs to be elevated. And so how do we inject more mission, more vision into the organization so that people really catch it, and culture would be a really important aspect on that. So the different seasons that we're in, leaders should have perspective on that. I think that's what we've really picked up, and tailor capacity building according to the season that the organization is in, so that the jet fuel doesn't leak out of the engine, as you said, Werner. That's a great point.
I'm so encouraged by, I think, just by this awareness around all of us. I think the whole nonprofits and ministry space, just a more awareness to come alongside leaders to just help in this huge task of moving forward into serving communities and reaching things that touches all of our hearts, but at the same time having to take this huge responsibility, which is actually a skill set that needs to be learned. I think all of us goes on this journey. It's a skill set to learn to continuously monitor what's happening with your board and how's the finances doing, and the detail of the health of your team and what team members are needed when. But just to move into that space. So I think it's a great encouragement that people are willing to come alongside leaders to help them, and especially the younger generation. I think there are so many resources out there.
I'm inspired by the kind of leaders that we're working with. I'm inspired by their resilience and their passion for God's kingdom. And so we really salute those leaders and the teams that work with them. And I think our heart at Mergon is just simply to get behind and to see how we can lift up. Werner, thank you so much for spending time with us. We value your wisdom and your input, and I'm really grateful for the effort and the input that you've given.
Just wish from our side that we can really do well in encouraging and supporting our leaders to be the best leaders they can be, and for the organizations to reach the impact that they've been called to.
If you've listened to this podcast about jet fuel for organizational health, then there are one or two process items we'd encourage you to take with your team. Firstly, discuss what organizational life stage you are in as a ministry. And we define these in 3 different ways. Firstly, are you in the people practice life stage, where people practices are strong, culture is good, recruiting is good, leadership and mission is clear? Or are you in the thinking practice life stage, where you are evolving your strategies and you've had a number of years to think about the implications of your ministry output? Or are you in the governance life stage? The governance life stage is where financial best practice is happening, governance is really good. Each of these have pros and cons. And so consider the implications, the strengths and the weakness of the season that you're in. Secondly, think about the capacity building needs of the various areas of organizational health. What are the things you need to be building into, and how can you get that resourcing in, either from within the team or from outside?
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Elevate, brought to you by the Mergon Foundation. We trust you found this conversation valuable and hope you will join us for more on the topic of leadership and organizational health.